Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm sure you're all acquainted to webinars by now, so we'll give it a few more seconds for everybody to connect with us. So just a few seconds of patience. For those of you who have just connected, welcome and thanks for joining us today. We're just letting everybody connect now, so I'm asking for just a few more moments of patience. All right. Thank you very much again to everybody who's joining us today for today's showcase event with Huawei and with Scot Corry. We are going to be talking about the big change that has happened recently in South Africa with some policy changes allowing for higher thresholds in terms of embedded generation. Scott will tell you everything about this in a few moments. And of course, he will also tell you in a second part of his presentation about some Huawei products which are of particular interest for companies looking to go solar and for large systems. Before we welcome Scott, I would just like to give you a little word of housekeeping. So I'm sure you are all familiar with this by now, but just to make sure, yes, the full presentation and the recording will be shared after the event. So no problem about this. You can just sit back, relax, and make sure that you are enjoying the presentation. We'll send you all the slides. And then the second point, you see at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom controls that you have three options. One of them is the chat section. The chat section is really good to say hi to everybody else and to maybe chat with other participants, with other listeners. However, if you wish to submit a question to Scott, please do so through the Q&A box. That Q&A box is being recorded, so in case we don't have enough time today to address your question in the Q&A live session, at least we will have a record of it and it will be shared with Scott so he can follow up with you later on. That's it for housekeeping. So back to today's topic, and let me quickly introduce Scott. Scott is the new business and sales manager at Kathia Energy based in South Africa. Kathia is a value-added partner of Huawei. And so this is why Scott is joining us today with a privileged view and expert view on the South African market. Scott has almost 20 years of experience, first working mostly in the telecom business, and then now for the last 5 years in the renewable space. And in the renewable space, he's focusing exclusively on large commercial and utility scale solutions, which is really like the topic of the day. And another special element that I'm happy to mention about Scott is that he's also the founder of another company called Hearables, which is a company specialized in voice, audio, and video collaboration solutions, which is not related to today's topic, but definitely a very interesting aspect in today's world. So Scott, very happy to welcome you today. Thanks for joining us. And I'm going to make you co-host now so that you can share your screen and start your presentation. Scott, are you with us?
Yes, I'm right here, John. I'm just sharing the screen, so if you bear with me 2 seconds. You should have the view now.
Yes, we're good to go. Thank you.
Excellent. So firstly, thank you very much, John, for that introduction. I must say, I've certainly presented a few sessions before in my life, but I was mentioning to John earlier, most of them have been live environment where you have more of an interaction with the audience. So Webinars, certainly not my forte, but it's interesting to try and experience new things. And as John says, we are in a new world. It's a new way of working. So I suppose for those of us that are specialists in certain industries, it will become relevant to be able to present like this going forward in the short term as we go through our current pandemic. Anyway, without further ado, we're going to start talking about the 100 megawatt opportunity. Realistically, what it is, you know, in the context of the Southern African market, and what it is in the context of our clients, Cathia being a distributor and Huawei being a manufacturer, in terms of the industry and the expansion that we're going to see. So, as we all know, the context certainly isn't a hard one for us to cover. Eskom, our current parastatal, has been through the press in shambles for years. We've had numerous bouts of load shedding at different levels across the country, depending on what municipality you sit under. We're sitting with aged infrastructure and in fact have had recent on-site disasters, which are certainly leading to this point. I think the government has realized that the corporate and consumer market of South Africa certainly can't bear the brunt of these failures, and that something needs to be done to ensure that we can be able to self-provide in the first place, and secondly, to allow organizations that have the financial capability to be able to possibly feed that back into our national grid infrastructure as that starts to become more reliable, and thereby be able to provide better services, literally across the industry and across the country, to be fair. In terms of the government's view on this, I think they've taken quite a big step in terms of their planning and their development planning in this sector. The numbers on these slides absolutely speak for themselves. This growth in the renewable sector is not just to subsidize the lack of the archaic infrastructure that Eskom currently has, but also to provide a more greener energy production for South Africans across the board. I mean, if we look at them just at a very high level, we're talking about 4,000 megawatts of generation to be procured between 21 and 2022. 3,200 megawatts of that will be this year alone. There's a procurement of 10,000 megawatts of renewables in IPPs for 2022, which I think is a significant task at hand, but if it's achieved, will certainly go a long way in helping us provide more cleaner and reliable energy across our sector. Embedded generation is going to increase by 1,000 from 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts. And then more importantly, they'll also be looking at battery provision. The slide itself that I'm looking at, sorry, I'm going to go back, doesn't seem to have the actual information on it. I apologize for that, but the government is looking at doing 1,000 to 2,000 megawatts of battery storage in the next 2 to 3 years. I think most of that will be predominantly handled at a municipal level. I don't think that's going to be handled at a national level. And 500 of that is planned for the next 6 to 12 months. That's a significant growth in our industry, and will certainly be fantastic for the players that are involved in that space. Of course, the government's plan to change our generation capacities and to go renewables has a significant impact on very large organizations that offer what we would call utility scale projects. But in reality, the change in the current legislation affects what I would call the more on the ground EPCs and project developers who typically play in this commercial and industrial space. I think that these businesses are then going to be given some unique challenges as we see this move forward in the next 12 to 24 months. And I've kind of categorized that into three areas. The first is the speed and ease of deployment, very important. The yields and reliabilities that you require on site. And then, of course, for these companies, more sites require more management. And in each one of these categories, I've lined up some points of importance. On the speed and ease, we talk about end-to-end solutions. So being able to provide a customer an ecosystem where you can select from one provider and be able to deliver something that is integrated and sustainable. Simplistic plant design, which makes things a lot more modular in terms of your structure, lowering the overall balance of system requirements. And then, of course, third-party integration becomes quite important. In terms of yields and reliability, the industry itself is certainly moving very heavily towards string-based solutions in larger deployments versus what we would have seen as centralized maybe 5 years ago being the key player in that space. Obviously, this offers us higher plant availability and what I've classified as a quicker recovery time, which we'll delve into a little bit later in a few of my other slides. Then with more sites requiring management, obviously sites now have the opportunity to be larger in capacity. When you look at 1 megawatt being the cap, jumping to 100 megawatts is a significant step. What I'm noticing from my clients specifically is that there's a lot of activity and a lot of questions coming in the 5 to 10 megawatt type space. And that even for most of our current EPCs in the market is a significant jump when we consider the quantity of clients they might have serviced on an annual basis. Those clients now possibly quadrupling their capacity requests because they now have the opportunity to be able to do that. Clients now having nationally based sites, when we talk about multinationals possibly trying to offer themselves their own total energy generation. And then, of course, managing your own dispersed teams with multiple clients across the country. You're going to require more people to be able to deploy these products a lot quicker and obviously service your clients as easily and as efficiently as possible. So we jump into Huawei. I put a little caption in there. Who are we? It's kind of like the Hyundai is Sundai. I thought it would make it a little bit easier for everyone to be able to pronounce it as we move forward. Huawei have certainly noticed something of importance. Internationally, we know that climate change is something that is a huge topic of discussion. And we know that a lot of the first world countries are committing to be carbon neutral within the next 20 to 30 years. Carbon neutrality doesn't just come from the renewable sector, solar energy, us deploying a 5 megawatt plant for a customer, but it's more about being able to be more efficient across every portion of your business, as well as in your consumer life. And with this in mind, Huawei have specifically put together a division that they call Digital Power. Digital Power will cover all of their products, both in the commercial as well as in the utility and fusion solar space. And we'll see that grow over the coming months and coming years into a division that will deliver solutions for a greener environment for us all. Little background into Huawei South Africa, for those of you who are joining us from our local continent and our local country. Huawei have been here for a very long period of time. Most of the key features that you'll notice and the milestones on this slide focus on the telecommunications and enterprise side of their business, but certainly some very important milestones that have been achieved. More importantly for me is to be able to say that they have a solid office and a solid team of people within country. And Fusion Solar, more importantly, as a business, has seen a quadruple growth in employees in the last 3 to 6 months. So they're certainly throwing all of their chips on the table. They see South Africa and Southern Africa as a huge area of growth. And of course, given this current announcement, there's certainly going to be massive growth for both them as well as clients and everyone who's on the call right now. Just to give you a little bit more of a background on Huawei International, not just from kind of a local perspective, almost 200,000 employees internationally, which sounds like a lot, but more importantly is that half of those are invested in research and development. That's a lot when you consider the capacity that they currently have in terms of employees. To be able to take half of those and be consistently investing in research and development is pretty huge. They're 49th in the Fortune 500 companies internationally. Number 5 internationally in the technology research and development investment. And although this slide only reflects up till H1 2020, I have seen the numbers at the end of 2020 and where we are now in 2021. And that 13% year-on-year growth is certainly still continuing. And I think we're going to see that grow into larger figures within the next 12 to 18 months. If you didn't know, Huawei as a business, and I keep saying Fusion Solar, excuse me, I should say the digital power business unit focuses on 3 areas. They offer a residential solution for those of you who are looking for something to offer you a little bit of battery backup within your home environment. They have a commercial and industrial product selection, and then of course the utility scale products. We're going to focus today more on the commercial and industrial space and some of the key features that would be important in the context of deploying more projects across more sites, seeing that this threshold level has been increased. Just to close off the who are we side of my presentation, for those of you who have been in the industry for a long period of time, central inverters have certainly been the flavor of the month when it comes to projects that deploy 5 megs and above, purely because of their cost versus other inverters that were available. But Huawei saw that string inverters would certainly be the future. They've invested quite heavily in that. And as we can see that it's clearly become at plus 60% of the market, pretty much the mainstream solution offered, both in commercial and utility scale projects. And I'm pleased to announce that the Fusion Solar or Digital Power business unit has shipped 175 gigawatts cumulative global in terms of string inverters, which makes Huawei currently the #1 global inverter shipper, which by all accounts is certainly a significant achievement. I'm going to delve a little bit more into the commercial and industrial solutions. I'm not going to do a death by PowerPoint in terms of this box has these bits and pieces, but more to talk to you about some certain key features, benefits, and developments within the product that would be important when we put it into the context of this higher threshold discussion that we've had a little bit earlier, and how this can help you deploy better solutions for your clients. And in turn, I think the importance of that is to be able to provide both yourselves, as whether you're simply an EPC or a project developer, more return on your investment. So if we take a very high level view of the Fusion Solar commercial and industrial smart PV solution as an overview, that picture very high level lays out what you'll see in terms of your modules connected to your standard PV inverter, running through a communication module, and then tied into your grid environment, and a little dotted line which goes into a product called Fusion Solar Smart PV Management, which is effectively a cloud software product that allows you to view, control, and manage all of your Huawei deployed sites. In terms of the inverters, we offer anything from a 12 kilowatt inverter all the way up to a 100 kilowatt inverter in this commercial environment. These can be paired with a smart optimizer, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And then we have our communication portal, which is listed there as the smart dongle, but you can also look at a product called the smart logger, which is a completely different technology. And then we've got our monitoring portal, which I mentioned earlier, where we can look at all devices and control our sites. In terms of the optimizers, which was something that we certainly wanted to focus on today because it's a topic of deep conversation within the Huawei team, and it's something quite unique in that there's a lot of environments, specifically in the commercial space, where a deployment is affected by multiple external issues. Shading is always something that people talk about, but in reality, when we're talking about rooftop type deployments, there can be air conditioning, fencing can be in the way, base stations, billboards, anything can affect the performance of your modules. So by using the optimized solution, we're looking at a 30% increase on performance across your deployed site. Now that's quite important. I think what's important to note here, which is a unique feature, is that you can run the solution as a partial optimized solution if required. Because Huawei use a multi-string inverter technology, you can have a single string that is optimized, and you can have a string that is not optimized. And that becomes quite important when we start talking about balance of system and costs in terms of the overall deployment. If I skip to the next slide, you'll see this multi-string solution that I've mentioned earlier, where we can add more modules to a string, which allows us to be a lot more flexible in terms of our deployment. And then again, tying that to an optimized solution will certainly provide us with a more cost-effective environment. Now, when we talk about deployments of this size, one of the key things that becomes quite important is safety. Safety is a big topic internationally. In South Africa, I think we find that the only municipality that seems to drive it quite stringently is the city of Cape Town, my hometown, so hello from Cape Town. But it's certainly going to start to become something of importance as more customers deploy in their commercial environments. Insurance companies and IPP providers are going to be asking for assurances that there is the proper safety precautions on site to ensure that, number one, the equipment doesn't get damaged, of course, and number two, that the building and its infrastructure doesn't become damaged in the short to long term. Oh, so one of those features, which is certainly very unique to the Huawei offering, is something which is called arc fault protection. So question quite simplistically is, what is arc fault protection? It is an AI, so artificial intelligence, which we'll certainly cover on the next slide, driven technology that senses an arc across any one of the electrical connections within the client's environment. It will sense that arc and will within 0.5 seconds cut the connection to the inverter and reset. What's important is that once that reset is done, our AI learns exactly at what part of the deployment this is taking place. And if it happens again in succession, it will then send the relevant notifications to you or your team through the Fusion Solar software to ensure that you can either send someone out to manage it or control that environment until such time as you can. So if I skip to the next slide, you'll see you'll be given a little, it's almost like I would say a video presentation, which tells you what arc fault protection is. But I think verbally I've kind of covered it, that at a module junction box, on a connector, on anything in the environment where you could have a break in technology, the arc fault protection will cut that connection. And as I've said, the AI, artificial intelligence, will consistently learn whether or not that is a regular occurrence or whether it is something abnormal. And through that process, we'll then be able to notify your relevant operations and maintenance teams to keep that site up and running at all times. Of course, when your guys get to site, what becomes quite important is them getting up on the roof and working on the environment. And with the solutions deployed through Huawei when using the optimizers, you can then have a 0 volt availability on that specific string. So when your guys get to site, you can cut that down, and there's absolutely no danger of them getting injured or electrocuted whilst they're there resolving that specific problem that has been notified to the O&M team on site. This is just a TUV report. I think it's important to bring this up. I know a lot of manufacturers make a lot of claims about a lot of technology, certainly a lot of features and stuff that are in their products that they build. I think it's great to have the backing of industry standards that prove and test that it certainly does what it says on the box. I always like to say that. And as we can see here on the slide, it certainly proves a 0.5 second shutdown time, which is certainly quite quick and is very important in terms of protecting, as I've said before, both the investment in equipment as well as the building itself, protects it from any potential fire hazards that might take place. So if we put that all together, we've got some leading technologies that bring a better experience. I think the better experience is for EPCs, for people who are deploying the technology within the environment. We've got our artificial intelligence, we've got the powered electronics, we've got big data, which will be continually learning and controlling the environment. And then there's something else which is called the module auto mapping. On the next slide, if I show you that, if I look at that site, you can see, wow, if I was someone that needed to get those modules sorted out, I'd be a bit confused about how I was going to lay it out. And anyone who's done a deployment or managed it from the back end will certainly know that being able to get that layout on the software program that you might be using does become a bit of a challenge. Huawei have a very great solution in this space. You can, with your mobile phone or your teams can, scan the serial numbers from those modules on site, and the system will automatically map out the exact position of those modules within the environment. Now, this goes back to saving time in terms of deployments. So there's that speed and easy deployment discussion that I laid out a little bit earlier on in the slides. Something else that's quite important is Huawei focus quite heavily on their reliability. There are 3 areas of focus here. Firstly, fuseless technology. None of the inverters carry a fuse, which certainly helps in terms of operations and maintenance. A lot of clients ask why there's no LCD. Other manufacturers have LCDs on their devices. Again, it's another point of failure. No requirement for the LCD. Anyone who goes on site, the engineer can view the inverter using a connection from their mobile phone And certainly using Fusion Solar, you can view the inverter on site if it's connected to any one of the communication platform devices. And then no buttons. Again, buttons and switches certainly become a problem on site with anything that's deployed. And in reality, when we talk about large deployments, mean multiple areas of failure, and you certainly want to limit the amount of areas that you could have a breakage on a device. And these three things are quite important. And to close off on this slide is also natural air cooling. So using fanless technology to cool the inverters on site becomes important. Fans, again, are another point of failure. This is certainly on the smaller inverters in the Huawei range. Some of the larger utility scale inverters, I know some people will certainly make mention of that, do have fans in them, but that's a different technology and certainly is designed differently for that specific environment. Now, if we tie all of that together, there's one more product that we haven't spoken about. I've spoken about Fusion Solar software, the management software that allows you to control, design, and manage your environments. Huawei have another software product called IV Curve. IV Curve is a product that's available to you to buy as an EPC or a developer. You buy it in megawatt chunks, if I could put it that way. And it allows you to do a diagnostic report on a site from a remote central location. So you can imagine some sort of a control room managing 5 or 10, 15, 20 sites. Really, the number is irrelevant, but you can run a 10-minute diagnostic on that site, and that will be able to give you information in terms of hotspots on modules, PID, diode short circuits, and there's multiple of other choices in terms of reports that you can have. I certainly don't want to delve into those today because we'd be here for another 45 minutes. But if you want to get more information, by all means, reach out and we'll get one of the specialists to introduce you to the software and you can learn a little bit more about it. Currently, Huawei have 7 gigawatts deployed on this technology, and it's proving to be quite cost effective in terms of being able to accurately diagnose faults on site. You can imagine it helps you limit sending teams out to site to solve problems that necessarily you don't know what they are. At least in this case, you get a high level view of precisely what's going on, and you can resolve that issue quite quickly and quite cost effectively. So as a closing slide on that CNI presentation, there's 8 innovations within the Huawei suite which offer you the optimal energy cost efficiency. First, we've got our AI-powered ARC fault protection. We've got module voltage string shutdown, which is important for safety. CNI-tailored ARC fault protection. Then we've got the increase of energy availability using the optimizers up to 35%. And again, remember, you can have partial optimization. You do not have to optimize the entire site. We've got built-in PID recovery, which is obviously for better module performance. We've got the auto mapping, scan the modules and automatically set them up on the system. We've got our no fuse, no LCD, no moving parts, which certainly improves on the reliability of the product. And then we've got our smart IV curve, which helps us be able to find faults on site and be able to get them resolved with speed and with ease. I think all of these features together will certainly help you increase your return on investment. So just quickly, so that you understand what's available from Huawei in the utility scale space. That's a quick snapshot of the product set. In fact, you'll see it's very much laid out similar to the CNI. But what's important for me to go through here is that the smart PV inverter right now has a maximum product available of 215 kilowatts. It's connected to a smart array controller. Huawei have multiple transformer solutions to consider for smaller and larger utility scale environments. And then the smart management system is exactly the same as what you use in the CNI. And you can certainly look at incorporating the IV curve diagnostics into this space. What I'd like to very importantly point out here is that Huawei use a special communication technology in their environment, which is called MBUS. That means that there are no RS485 cables run between any one of the inverters or communication devices in the environment. The question always is, why is that important? Well, number one, less cabling certainly requires less time on site and certainly saves money. And number two, when it comes to fault detection, it lowers the level of communication being a risk on site. Everything going through the one cable means that I always say you've always kind of got one throat to choke. So it's a lot easier to fault manage in that environment. Also, you'll see on the left-hand side, we've got bifacial and trackers. It's important to note that Huawei have been working very closely with 3 or 4 of the industry leaders in tracker solutions, and they can offer a direct connect solution from that tracker into the inverter to be able to control those. And that will be connected to the artificial intelligence environment that Huawei have created, allowing the inverters to learn how to control the trackers to better optimize your energy return on investments on that site. Then just a little bit more about multi-MPP, quite important. It's something we spoke about earlier in the CNI space. Just to let you know that specifically in bifacial environments, of the tests that have been done, we're able to present 3% more yields in a bifacial environment at a 6.3 megawatt block by using a multi-MPPT solution. I think that's pretty significant. And anyone who's looking to try and get a solid return on investment in their environment certainly should be looking not only at string inverters, but certainly at Huawei and their technology and leadership in this space. Then, just to come back to one of my earlier slides, talking about return on investment, maximizing costs specifically in operations and maintenance. It's important to note that string inverters offer less points of failure in terms of not having DC combiners like your central inverters do, as well as if one inverter should fail, you lose a very small portion of your power generation versus having a larger central inverter that would drop quite a significant size of the site's generation capacity. Not that that's really of concern for Huawei, because as it stands right now, and again, verified by an industry body that's well respected, that they've got a 99.996% availability across their current smart string inverters. And that test was done across multiple sites, multiple days, multiple inverters to ensure that it was accurate and as sustainable as possible. And just in closing, importance in terms of our safety and reliability when deploying both CNI and utility scale projects. We've got the fuse-free design, which is lesser point of failure. IP66 across the product range. IP66 is very important because not only does it stop water, which we find with IP65, but 66 provides the dust proof. And dust and electronics certainly don't go hand in hand, as you can imagine. So very, very important. And then we talk about our MBUS communication, which allows us to not use RS485. And again, less points of failure, less costs on the deployment, better communication, and easier easier servicing of your client's site. And then just to show you a picture that really shows in terms of taking a string inverter into the environment, we're talking about a rip and replace, 30 minutes on site. Pretty much anyone in a standard O&M environment could do this, and that offers you significant savings in the environment. So thank you. I hope I've added some value to any thoughts you might be having in this space today. I think that the increase in capacity is a huge opportunity for our industry. I think it's going to give us significant increase. I think the Southern African economy really needs this, not just to grow the business of the current EPCs, but I think we'll certainly see a whole bunch of new people coming through the industry, growing and offering employment at a time when we absolutely needed hand over fist. And obviously dovetailing that is the fact that we can now alleviate a lot of the power generation issues we have from our current provider and be able to self-provide, and then in the future be able to feed back into the grid, plus giving a greener environment in South Africa for us all. So thank you very much. I hand you back to John, who probably has some questions from the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Scott. Thank you for this thorough and complete presentation. And yes, indeed, it did generate quite some interest from our listeners today. So I don't want to make anybody wait. And if you'll agree, Scott, maybe you can stop sharing your screen so we can see you, a bigger version of you. There we go. And I'll go with I've selected 8 questions for you, and maybe we can agree to just out of respect for time, we can agree to keep your answers relatively concise. I know it will be difficult to answer the questions completely in a short time, but it's just a way of starting the conversation, and then there's an opportunity to follow up with whoever asked those questions. First question from Henry, whom I believe might be a business owner looking into solar for his business. His question is about safety, and what should business owners really be concerned about? I mean, there's the obvious concern about fire hazard, but is there anything else that business owners who are not technicians, solar specialists, that they should be having in the back of their minds?
Fire hazard is the one and only and the most important thing that they should be concerned about. In the US, it is a highly controlled and managed environment. Obviously, as I've said before, it's not here. The reason why it's important to look at this in the context of what we're talking about is that as we see this increase in the projects and the increase in the business in South Africa, the EPCs and the current people on the ground are going to be put under immense pressure to deploy projects at speed. And when you do these things, as we all know, mistakes are made. A cable cut here, a connection not done properly here, a crimp incorrect on this cable, and in reality, it can happen. We are talking about a live electrical environment, and that's it. Yeah, the safety is not just to your investment of product. So as a client, he's bought the equipment, which is a significant investment, but it's sitting in and around your building at all times. So the safety of fire is of utmost importance. Yes.
Thank you very much. And as an extension of this question from Barbara, is there, or do you see an impact with the growth of storage? Is this creating more safety concerns, or is this creating more technical challenges, or is it just a normal extension of power generation on site?
Yes, storage is certainly not providing any safety concerns at all. Most of the storage solutions that we're finding on the market now are what we would call, I'd call them sealed containers. So you buy a battery in a box, you just end up buying different sizes of batteries in the box. Huawei will certainly have a product coming to market during the course of next year at various size capacities. But realistically, the storage conversation is it's just going to be a natural extension to your current generation requirements. And I think the importance of storage will come more when we talk about lifestyle and industries that require to run on a 24-hour basis, where you can use that battery power to run your factory. And secondly, as a home user, as a consumer, you know, we're all hoping in the next 10 years we'll be driving electric cars. So you'd want to store that energy during the day and use that stored energy both to run your home and charge your electric vehicle for your next trip the next day.
Next question is from Isaac, and Isaac is asking if you could explain again the differences, very briefly, of course, but between central inverters and string inverters. You've explained that there is a growing market share from string inverters, that this was something selected by Huawei a few years ago, like early on. But can you just quickly explain what are the two main elements maybe for each, and why string is obviously offering a better solution?
Better solution. So central inverters explain themselves, they're centralized and typically are laid down on a site as a large capacity generator inverter. They typically start in 5 megawatt blocks, and that's why they've always led themselves to larger deployments. String inverters typically are a lot smaller capacity, and therefore you require more of them on site to deliver the same amount of energy generation. Now, you might ask the question of, well, surely buying 1 box versus buying 50 boxes would be a lot more simpler. But the reality is that central inverters are very specialist. So when you need them serviced or they need to be repaired, you need to get a specialist crew on site to handle that. And because they are large by design, you lose 5 megawatts of generation capacity for however long it might take for you to get that specialist team on site. String inverters, by comparison, use a lesser capacity. So if a 200 kilowatt inverter goes down, I only lose that 200 kilowatt generation, which is a very small portion of a 5 megawatt deployment. And to replace that inverter realistically is to take it off the bracket from the wall, remove a few cables, disconnect the MPPTs, which are effectively the cables that go to the modules, replace those, hang it back on the wall and move forward. So firstly, less loss on generation. Secondly, quicker time to get back up and running. And thirdly, historically, central inverters always worked out to be more cost effective to deploy in larger environments. But the cost of string inverters has dramatically decreased over the last 24 to 36 months, where we're starting to see, we can almost see that it's almost a similar cost environment.
Very clear. Thank you very much. Question from an anonymous listener is looking for some clarification on the partial optimization that you mentioned earlier. Does it mean that each panel needs to be connected to the optimizer, or can you do different configurations of panels connecting to it? How does it actually work?
Very easy. The inverters come with multiple MPPTs. Depending on the capacity of the inverter, will tell you how many MPPTs that has. That MPPT runs a string of modules. If you want to do partial optimization, you must optimize that string of inverters, and every module has an optimizer on it. Your second string can have no optimizers on it, but then that whole string is no optimizers. So your choice is either all optimized on one string, or all not optimized. You can't do a mix and match on a string.
Very clear. Thank you very much. And we stay into a technical question, also from an anonymous listener. Fans versus fanless. What is if it's being monitored, what is the failure rate of fans? And as a result of this, why are fanless systems better?
So straight up, very honest answer. There's no knowledge that I know of that it's being monitored, to be frank. But the reality is that certainly in the CNI environment, let's park the utility scale space, because a lot of those larger inverters do have fans, and there's a reason for that because of their size and capacity. In the CNI space, the fans tend to suck up a lot of dust, a lot of dirt, a lot of stuff out of the environment and feed that into the inverter itself. I know specifically that if we talk about Huawei as a product and we talk about some of the competition in the market, there's no separate cavity between the fan and the actual electronics of the inverter itself. So it's sucking that straight out of the air and blowing it directly into the inverter. So you can imagine with time, like your hi-fi at home, second it starts to get dusty, after 10 years or so, electronic components start to go. So that's why having fans in that kind of environment doesn't make sense, and heat shrink technology to cool the inverters becomes very, very important.
Very clear. Thank you very much. For the last three questions, maybe I'd like to move away from technical topics and focus a little bit more on commercial aspects. I don't know if you've read it, but the company Cross Boundary, playing in the CNI sector across Africa, has published a report based on their sites that they have been monitoring just a few weeks ago, and based on their data, it actually turned out that real generation of the solar assets on site was somewhere between 5 to 10% less than the expected generation based on projection models like GIS, very renewable source, renowned sources. I was wondering if this is also something that you have heard about or that you have witnessed with your clients and the projects that you have been involved with. Is this something that has also crossed your way?
So I haven't read the entire report, but I certainly did see it pop up. It's not something that we're hearing back from our clients at all, if I have to be completely honest. In fact, on the flip side of that, we're seeing them certainly telling us that they're hitting the numbers in terms of what they're committing to their clients. I think it becomes very important, especially if we talk about deployments in Africa. In some instances, what becomes quite an important conversation is which module manufacturers you talk to, and making sure that you are buying the best capacity modules for that environment and not trying to cut costs in terms of the price per panel. We're certainly seeing that in the industry as those prices start to increase. And the second thing is something that we call temperature degradation. Inverters across all manufacturers have a curve, and in terms of that curve, at certain temperature levels, and obviously us being in Africa, temperature levels are very, very important. At certain temperature levels, the generation capacity of those inverters drop off quite substantially. So it's certainly important. I send it to all my clients when I talk to them about projects and inverters, is I send them that curve report so that they can see at what point will they see a degradation and at what temperature, so that they can properly manage how they put that environment together. For me, I think it's a learning curve for a lot of the organizations. The technology is changing, and they're starting to realize, the African market is quite I would say, in its infancy in terms of IPP and being able to manage your production versus investment in that space. In Europe, they've already got farms that are 22 years old. So they have a lot of data that they can look back on. I think it's a little early for us to be able to look at it as a picture, But I think there's a lot of pieces to that we could talk for hours about.
Maybe for another webinar.
Yes.
Our next question comes from Vincent, and it's more of a market strategy question, and maybe I'll rephrase it a little bit. So on one side, we have typical CNI companies focusing on 500 kilowatt, 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt projects. On the other side, we have the big IPP developers, 20, 30, 50 megawatts, 100 megawatt. And now with this new thresholds, we end up in some kind of gray area where you can do a CNI project or a project with a CNI customer, but of 10, 20, up to 100 megawatts. How do you see this competition or collaboration happen between traditional CNI developers and the big large-scale projects?
It's a very good question. I get to deal with both sides of that coin. And if I have to be honest with you, my experience is that your large, typical developers who engage in the 50, 60, 100 megawatt type utility plants don't want to be part of the picture of our typical CNI guy who is doing the 1, 2, 3, now even can do the 10 megawatt deployments. But I think what becomes very important is that this is the opportunity for everyone, is that the EPC on the ground that was doing 10 1 megawatt projects a year is now going to do 10 megawatt projects a year. I don't think that we're going to see the CNI space all of a sudden skyrocket where everyone is going to be doing 50 plus deployments. I think we'll see them dip their toe in the water, and a lot of the large industrial companies will say, we'll do a 10. We'll do a 10 on one site and 10 on another site and 10 on, so it becomes multiple 10s. So to answer the question, it's going to be more about how can you scale your business to be able to keep up with that growth and maintain that growth in that space. I don't think it's going to become a part scenario. I think the two worlds are certainly still going to remain quite separate. But what's important is the technology that we currently have in the environment actually makes it quite easy for today's current 1 to 2 megawatt EPC to deploy a 10 megawatt scale. 5 years ago, if you asked someone to design a 10 megawatt plant, it was a mammoth task for 7 electrical engineers to spend 18 months to get this thing put together. That's not the case anymore. The reality is that the technology to design is there. The skills, we have the skills on the ground, and the products that are in the market, as I spoke about earlier, the speed and ease of deployment now is absolutely there. Everything is being driven by technology, and it shouldn't be seen as what challenges might we see and how do we integrate into that space, but the opportunity is there now. Let's grasp it and take off. The rocket is about to launch, and we're going to see massive growth. So if you're not on the rocket, you're going to get left behind.
It's actually a perfect introduction to the last question I would like to ask you, Scott. It's a question from Leah. Leah is experiencing a challenge finding people to join her team. So the team is growing, business is growing, but this is something I echo from AVSIA members also active in South Africa. We've been hearing several times that it's becoming a challenge to find skilled PV technicians. Is this something that you are also hearing on your side? And maybe do you have a magical solution to this problem?
So yes, it is a challenge, even in our business. You know, we've also grown exponentially in the last 24 months, let alone what's about to come. And to find good staff to bring on board that are technically competent and that can service your clients is 100% absolutely a challenge. I think one of the challenges we have in our sector right now is a lot of the large EPCs are actually more project developers So there's sales and marketing, and then they tend to outsource a lot of their work to companies that just specialize in getting that done. These guys tend to hold very hard and tight on those resources, and therefore the knowledge is not getting out into the industry. The only solution is, I would propose, and I'll probably take it back to Huawei. So my thought process would be someone has to put an academy together. We need to have an academy specifically driven by industry leaders that bring learners in. We get a learnership development program going, and we teach these guys how to become specialists in certain sectors of the environment, and we grow them in and grow them up into the industry. And that's got to start at grassroots. If we don't do that, then absolutely the scale of increase and growth that we're going to see in our businesses just won't happen, because we'll be stifled by the fact that there's not enough resources to do the work that needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Scott. I think that was very clear, and we managed to cover a whole range of different topics. Before I let you go, and before I let go everybody, I would like to quickly also share a little bit of AFSIA news, quick insights into our upcoming events. If you liked today's event, hopefully you will like the following ones as well. So first, we will have a webinar with Jacqueline Richards from Siegen Solar, also from South Africa, who will be explaining us about the online tool to help plan the CNI projects and facilitate sourcing. We will also launch something new, which is the Big Africa Solar Quiz. I hope many of you will be joining. This is meant to be a fun event with your friends or with your colleagues, testing your knowledge and trying to see who has the largest and diversified knowledge about solar in Africa. And then, yes, this is it. So those are the two events. And of course, the last one, which will be November, the AFSIA Awards. So I warmly invite all of you to take a look at the different categories. We have 16 categories this year. So definitely there is one for you. And I warmly invite you to apply to one or several of them. So this is it for today. Scott, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks everybody for spending the time. We've been a bit longer than what we had scheduled, but I think it was a very important topic and very helpful explanations and insights from you, Scott. So yes, once again, thank you. And I hope we will be welcoming you again in the future. Have a great day.
Right. Thank you, John. Bye-bye.